Welcome back, scary people, to the One Scary Woman YouTube channel, where we are all about getting our films done this year. So taking them all the way from concept to completion. And this month, our focus is totally on getting those screenplays good to go. So in last week's video, we talked about basic 3-act structure. If you haven't watched it yet, make sure you go back, take a look so that you can nail your basic 9 beats of 3-act structure. It's not the only structure format that exists for screenplays, but it is really the most common one. And for me, I think it's the most simple one. So the easiest place to start when you start mapping out your story. Now, today, what I want to talk about is I want to talk a little bit about subplots, because you can also add subplots into your screenplay. So at this point, if you're in the outlining process, I really recommend adding some subplots in, because it's going to flesh your story out. It's going to keep it from feeling too stale, too one note, too boring if we're always just focused on the same character and the same issue the whole time. That's not to say we're going to go off on wild tangents, but it is going to give your audience a little bit more of variety in your story. So subplots are really, really helpful, especially when you're looking at that Act 2. So as mentioned in the video from last week, Act 2 is about 50% of the whole script, and it's usually where people get stuck, because while Act 1 and Act 3 have a whole bunch of different beats that you have to hit for the structure, Act 2 really just has one. It just has the midpoint happening in the middle. So the midpoint, to remind you, is going to fundamentally change something from that point on in the script. But the rest of that Act 2, to some writers, can really feel like kind of a wasteland. So what do you fill it with? So number one, first and foremost, looking at those 9 points of 3-act structure that you came up with, what naturally do you have to include? What scenes do you have to create and include between those beats so that when they happen, it makes sense, so that your character is actually developing the way that they need to? Another thing to look at is, yes, subplots. So a subplot usually it's going to involve at least one character that's not your main character. Sometimes they don't involve the main character at all. Sometimes it could be 2 or more other characters having some kind of issue or discussion apart from the main character. The thing to keep in mind, though, when you use subplots is that even if the main character is not there, sometimes they are there, but even if they're not there, the subplot still always has something to do with them in some way. And the subplot also always has to have something to do with your overall theme. So one of the best examples of this is if you look at almost every rom-com ever made, so any kind of rom-com movie, there's typically a best friend or some kind, some friend who's in the background of the main story with the main character and the main love interest. But that friend usually also finds love and fulfillment in some other relationship, or at the very least, at the end, it's implied that that friend is maybe getting together with one of the friends of the other love interest. Now, the thing to point out with this, just to help you keep it all straight, is thematically, it still ties into the romantic comedy. So again, when you're doing a subplot, it doesn't mean, well, I'm just going to throw in something to go off on a crazy tangent or throw in something extra just to fill pages that doesn't have to do with my story. It still has to tie into the theme. So with rom-coms, usually there are friends, supporting characters that also find romance, because it enhances that overall theme of love, and it reinforces the love that the main character is going to find as well. Another really great example of how a subplot is always about the main character, even if the main character is not there, comes from the movie Unforgiven. So many of you have maybe seen this movie. This is the Clint Eastwood movie where he's the old gunslinger, and he, is charged, or he's invited, by a young gunslinger to accompany him, go back to this town and seek vengeance. So there is a group of prostitutes. Their friend was, horribly disfigured, her face cut up by these cowboys that came into town, and the cowboys faced no repercussions. So the prostitutes have pooled their money. They've put a big bounty on the heads of the people responsible for this. But the sheriff of that town has made it very clear that if any gunslinger comes to town, tries to get that vengeance, tries to collect the bounty, that there's going to be severe consequences. Now, there is a subplot in that movie featuring a character called English Bob, and I thank Screenwriting U, because this is an example they often give when talking about subplots. A character called English Bob, he's coming into town, and this is an example of a subplot that has really a beginning, middle, and end. So with your subplots, at the very least, you at least want them to have some kind of setup and payoff. So at least 2 beats, 2 moments in the script where we're seeing this subplot in action. This one has 3, as a lot of them do, so a full beginning, middle, and end. In the beginning, we see English Bob riding into town. He is really cocky. His reputation as a gunslinger precedes him. We're given to believe that he really knows what he's doing. And, if you believe him, that he is going to be able to breeze into this town, make light work of these guilty parties, and collect that money. What does actually happen when he gets to town is he encounters the sheriff, who humiliates him, beats him very badly. It's terrible on all levels. And then he runs him out of town. So this is an example of a subplot where the main character is not even present. He's not even there, yet it is still about him. The reason why is because we know he's also considering going to this town. And now, because we have seen what has happened to someone else who went to this town, we know exactly what might lie in wait for him. So what exactly is he risking? This makes us nervous for him. So this is a great prime example of how a subplot, even when the main character is not involved, still is about them. So as you decide to craft your subplots, that's my key piece of advice to you. Don't make something up just for the sake of making it up. Don't make it up just for the sake of filling pages, filling that act 2. Ask yourself what subplots would still deliver on the theme of the story that you're trying to tell, and which ones help to build information or worry or some kind of emotion for your main character, whether or not the main character is actually present for the subplot. Now, if you have some examples of subplots in films that you've seen that you've really liked, please go ahead and leave it below in the comments. I would love to hear your examples. And meanwhile, please be sure to like and subscribe if you too are on the journey of completing a screenplay or even completing a full feature film and want to be a part of this journey. See you next time.